Welcome to the Audiobook Insights. Today, we are analyzing one of the most influential management books of all time, Good to Great: Why Some Companies Make the Leap and Others Don't, by Jim Collins. Introduction. The journey we are about to undertake is based on a massive 5-year research project. It began with a simple yet burning question. In the world of business, we often see companies that start from birth as great visionaries. We see the Coca-Colas and the General Electrics, companies that seem to have greatness woven into their DNA. But what about the vast majority of companies? What about the companies that are merely good? Is it possible for a good company to become a great company? And if so, how? This is not a book about charismatic visionaries or overnight successes. It is a book about the physics of business performance. It is about taking a rigorous, data-driven look at what actually works. Jim Collins and his team of researchers started with a list of 1,435 companies from the Fortune 500. From that massive list, they were looking for a very specific pattern. They wanted to find companies that had 15 years of cumulative stock returns at or below the general stock market, followed by a transition point, and then 15 years of cumulative returns at least 3 times the market. Think about that for a moment. They weren't looking for companies that were always great. They were looking for companies that were average, boring even, and then suddenly they shifted gears and beat the market by a massive margin for a sustained period of 15 years. After sifting through the data, they found only 11 companies that met this criteria. Just 11. These companies, names like Abbott, Fannie Mae, Circuit City, Gillette, Kimberly-Clark, Kroger, Nucor, Philip Morris, Pitney Bowes, Walgreens, and Wells Fargo, became the good to great companies. But the research didn't stop there. To understand what made these companies special, Collins needed a control group. He needed to compare each good to great company to a similar company that was in the same industry, with the same resources, during the same era, but that failed to make the leap. Why did Walgreens succeed while Eckerd failed? Why did Nucor rise while Bethlehem Steel declined? The answers they found were shocking. They discovered that most of the conventional wisdom about business success, that you need a celebrity CEO, that you need a massive strategy overhaul, or that technology is the primary driver of change, was flat out wrong. Instead, they found a distinct set of timeless principles. This audio script is a deep dive into those principles. We will uncover the black box of what happened inside these companies during their transition. We are going to look at leadership, people, discipline, and the momentum that builds greatness. So prepare to challenge your assumptions. If you are leading a team, a company, or even just your own career, the findings of this study provide a roadmap for moving from mediocrity to excellence. Chapter 1. Good is the enemy of great. The book begins with a provocative statement that serves as the title of this chapter. Good is the enemy of great. Jim Collins posits that the reason we have so few truly great things in our society, great schools, great governments, great companies, is precisely because we have so many good ones. When things are good, we get comfortable. Good is efficient. Good pays the bills. Good keeps the lights on. Because good is not a crisis, we rarely feel the urgency to change it. We settle for competency and never push for excellence. Greatness, Collins argues, is not a function of circumstance. It is largely a matter of conscious choice and discipline. One of the most surprising findings detailed in this opening chapter is the context of the companies studied. You might assume that to become a great company, you need to be in a booming industry like technology or software. You might think you need to be riding the wave of a massive trend. The data proves otherwise. The good to great companies were in some of the most boring, lackluster industries imaginable. We are talking about grocery stores, steel mills, drugstores, and consumer goods. Walgreens was in the low-margin pharmacy business. Nucor was making steel when the American steel industry was collapsing. Kroger was an old, clunky grocery chain. Yet, despite these terrible circumstances, they produced returns that beat the general stock market by an average of 7 times. To put that in perspective, they outperformed legendary companies like Intel, General Electric, and Coca-Cola during the same period. This tells us something critical right from the start. Greatness is not about the hand you are dealt. It is about how you play that hand. Collins also takes time in this chapter to dismantle the celebrity CEO myth. When the researchers began their work, they expected to find that the good to great companies were led by larger-than-life personalities, charismatic leaders who swooped in to save the day. They found the exact opposite. The leaders of the comparison companies, the ones that failed to become great, were often the celebrities. They were the ones making headlines, writing autobiographies, and soaking up the spotlight. The leaders of the good to great companies, however, were people you have likely never heard of. They were quiet, humble, reserved, and sometimes even awkward. They were more like Abraham Lincoln or Socrates than a modern corporate rock star. They didn't seek fame, they sought results. This discovery was so profound that it warranted its own dedicated chapter, which we will explore next. This opening chapter also introduces the concept of the black box. Imagine the transition from good to great as a mysterious process. On one side, you have a mediocre company. You put it into the box. Inside the box, something happens. Changes are made, decisions are executed, and at the other side comes a great company. The entire purpose of this book is to open that black box and see what is inside. The research uncovered a framework of 3 broad stages: disciplined people, disciplined thought, and disciplined action. First, you need disciplined people. This isn't just about leadership, it's about having the right team. You don't ask, where are we going first? You ask, who is coming with us? Second, you need disciplined thought. You need the honesty to confront the brutal facts of your reality while maintaining the faith that you will prevail. You need a simple, clarifying concept, the Hedgehog Concept, to guide your decisions. Third, you need disciplined action. This isn't about frantic activity. It is about a culture of discipline where people do not need to be managed because they manage themselves. It is about the flywheel effect, the slow, steady buildup of momentum that eventually breaks through to greatness. This chapter sets the stage by stripping away our excuses. We can no longer say, we can't be great because our industry is tough. We can no longer say, we can't be great because we don't have a famous CEO. The data has removed those hiding places. The pursuit of greatness, Collins suggests, requires a shift in perspective. It requires us to stop settling for the good life and to start doing the rigorous work required to build something enduring. It is a journey that moves from the build-up phase to the breakthrough phase. As we conclude this first chapter, ask yourself, where in your life or organization are you accepting good performance? Where have you settled for competency because it is comfortable? The journey we are about to take will demand that you disturb that comfort. Chapter 2: Level 5 Leadership. One of the most defining characteristics of the Good to Great study was the reluctance of the researchers to credit leadership as the primary cause of success. In the early stages of the project, Jim Collins actually explicitly told his team to downplay the role of top executives. He was concerned that attributing success to a single leader is a lazy answer. It's too easy to say, they succeeded because they had a great CEO. However, the data refused to be ignored. As they analyzed the 11 good to great companies, a distinct pattern emerged that simply did not exist in the comparison companies. It wasn't just that the successful companies had good leaders, it was that they had a very specific type of leader. Collins coined a term for this specific type, the Level 5 leader. To understand Level 5, we have to look at the hierarchy of leadership capabilities that the study established. At Level 1, you have the highly capable individual. This is someone who makes productive contributions through talent, knowledge, skills, and good work habits. At Level 2, you have the contributing team member. This person contributes individual capabilities to the achievement of group objectives. At Level 3, you have the competent manager. This is someone who organizes people and resources toward the effective and efficient pursuit of predetermined objectives. At Level 4, you have the effective leader. This is the traditional view of a top CEO, someone who catalyzes commitment to a clear and compelling vision and stimulates higher performance standards. Most companies are run by Level 4 leaders, but to make the leap from good to great, Level 4 is not enough. You need Level 5. The Level 5 executive builds enduring greatness through a paradoxical blend of two seemingly contradictory traits: personal humility and professional will. Let's break down this duality because it is the heart of the chapter. First, let's look at personal humility. When we think of a powerful CEO, we often imagine a larger-than-life figure, a Patton or a Caesar. We imagine someone with a massive ego who commands the room. But the good to great leaders were almost the complete opposite. They were described by those who knew them as quiet, humble, modest, reserved, shy, gracious, and mild-mannered. Take Darwin Smith, the CEO of Kimberly-Clark, as the prime example. When Smith took over, Kimberly-Clark was a dusty, unremarkable paper company whose stock had fallen 36% behind the market over the previous 20 years. Smith himself was an in-house lawyer with a mild demeanor. He was awkward in social situations and lacked the fizzle of a celebrity CEO. Yet over his 20-year tenure, Smith generated stock returns that were 4.1 times greater than the general market, outperforming Coca-Cola and General Electric. How did he do it? This brings us to the second trait, professional will. While level 5 leaders are humble personally, they are fanatically driven professionally. They possess an incurable need to produce results. They are not weak, they are stoic. They will do whatever is necessary to make the company great, no matter how painful or difficult the decision. Darwin Smith demonstrated this will when he made the decision to sell the company's core business, the coated paper mills, to pivot entirely into the consumer paper products industry, competing directly against giants like Procter & Gamble. It was a terrifying move. Wall Street called it stupid. The media ignored him. But Smith had the ferocious resolve to stick to the strategy because the data showed it was the only way to become great.
This chapter highlights a crucial concept used by level 5 leaders, the window and the mirror.
Imagine a leader standing in a room. When things are going well, when sales are up and the stock is soaring, the level 5 leader walks to the window. They look out at their team, at luck, at external factors, and they assign credit there. They say, "We succeeded because of this great team," or "We were fortunate to have the wind at our backs." They essentially make themselves invisible during the victory lap. However, when things go wrong, when the company misses a target or a product fails, the level 5 leader walks to the mirror. They look at their own reflection and say, "I am responsible. I failed to prepare us. This is on me." Now, consider the comparison leaders, the ones who failed to take their companies to greatness. They do the exact opposite. When things go well, they look in the mirror. They preen. They take credit for their genius vision. They write books about their success. When things go wrong, they look out the window. They blame the economy. They blame the government. They blame their employees. The level 5 leader's ambition is first and foremost for the institution, not for themselves. This is why level 5 leaders are obsessed with succession planning. They want the company to be even more successful after they are gone. They set their successors up for victory. In contrast, level 4 leaders often suffer from the genius with 1,000 helpers model. They are the primary driving force, the brilliant mind. But because the organization relies entirely on their genius, the company often collapses when they leave. Sometimes subconsciously, these leaders want the company to struggle after they leave, because it acts as a testament to how essential they were. The chapter concludes by asking, can you learn to be level 5? Collins suggests that there are 2 categories of people, those who do not have the seed of level 5 in them, those who can never subjugate their ego to the greater good, and those who do. He believes the second group is larger than we think.
Under the right circumstances, self-reflection, a mentor, or a significant life event, many of us can begin to develop level 5 traits. It begins with practicing the discipline of the window and the mirror. It begins with shifting your ambition from "what can I get" to "what can I build?" As we move to the next chapter, we will see that the first thing a level 5 leader does is not set a vision or a strategy. It is something much more fundamental. Chapter 3. First who, then what. We have established the type of leader required for greatness. Now we must look at what that leader actually does. If you were to take a course on standard business strategy, you would likely be taught a very specific sequence of events. First, you develop a vision. Then you set a strategy to achieve that vision. Finally, you go out and hire the people to execute that strategy. It sounds logical. It sounds efficient.
but the good to great research found that this is exactly the wrong order. In this chapter, Jim Collins introduces one of the most famous metaphors in business literature, the bus. The leaders who took companies from good to great did not start by announcing a new vision or a complicated strategy. They started by getting the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus, and the right people in the right seats. And only then did they figure out where to drive it. Why is this inversion so critical? First, if you begin with the what, the strategy, and then hire people to fit that specific direction, what happens when the world changes? What happens when technology shifts or the economy crashes? You are stuck with a team hired for a specific task that is no longer relevant. But if you begin with the who, people who are smart, adaptable, and driven, they can pivot. They can handle whatever the road throws at them. Second, the motivation problem disappears. If you have the right people on the bus, you don't need to worry about how to motivate them.
The right people are self-motivated. They're driven by an inner compulsion to do excellent work, not because of a bonus structure or a demanding boss, but because that is simply who they are. This chapter draws a sharp contrast using the example of Wells Fargo. In the 1970s, the banking industry was facing massive deregulation. No one knew exactly what the future would look like. While Bank of America was busy dictating specific strategies from the top down, trying to predict the unpredictable, Dick Cooley at Wells Fargo took a different approach. He focused entirely on injecting the company with the best talent he could find. He famously said, "I don't know where we're going, but I know that if I have the right people, we'll figure it out." When the deregulation storm hit, Wells Fargo had the intellectual capital to navigate it brilliantly, while Bank of America struggled with a rigid culture and a team that couldn't adapt. Collins emphasizes a crucial distinction in this chapter, being rigorous versus being ruthless. Being ruthless means hacking and slashing. It means firing people without thought, often to save money or make a quick fix. This is characteristic of mediocre companies that use layoffs as a primary strategy. Being rigorous, however, means consistently applying high standards at all times, especially in upper management. To be rigorous means that the best people need not worry about their positions, and the wrong people cannot hide. The chapter outlines 3 practical disciplines for being rigorous. Discipline number 1. When in doubt, don't hire, keep looking. The single biggest constraint on the growth of a great company is not markets, technology, or competition. It is the ability to get and keep enough of the right people. Collins introduces Packard's Law, named after David Packard of HP, which states if your revenue growth exceeds your growth in people execution, you will not simply stagnate, you will fall. Do not compromise on talent just to fill a seat. Discipline number 2. When you know you need to make a people change, act. We often delay firing people. We hope they will get better. We move them to different roles. We create complex management systems to compensate for their incompetence. Collins argues that this is unfair to the person, who might flourish elsewhere, and unfair to the right people on the bus, who now have to carry the extra load. The moment you feel the need to tightly manage someone, you have likely made a hiring mistake. The best people don't need to be managed. They need to be led. Discipline number 3. Put your best people on your biggest opportunities, not your biggest problems. In many good companies, the best managers are sent to fix the broken divisions. The Chicago office is a mess. Send in our best fixer. But in great companies, the best people are put on the projects with the highest potential. You fix problems to survive, but you seize opportunities to thrive. If you bury your best talent in cleanup duty, you are capping your ceiling. Finally, this chapter touches on the surprising findings regarding executive compensation. Common wisdom suggests that if you want top performance, you need to offer massive stock options and exorbitant salaries. The data did not support this. There was no systematic pattern linking specific compensation packages to the good to great transition. The reason goes back to the core principle. The right people will do the right things and deliver the best results they are capable of, regardless of the incentive system. You cannot pay the wrong people enough money to make them do the right thing. Compensation is important to attract and retain the right people, but it is not the driver of their behavior. By the end of this chapter, the bus is loaded. We have a level 5 leader at the wheel and a team of disciplined, self-motivated people in the seats.
Now, this group must look out the windshield and decide where to go. They must face the reality of the road ahead.
Chapter 4. Confront the brutal facts. yet never lose faith. We have the right leader. We have the right people. Now, what does this group actually do? The first step in setting a direction is to locate exactly where you are on the map. You cannot navigate to greatness if you are lying to yourself about your starting position. In this chapter, Jim Collins uncovers a fundamental difference between the companies that made the leap and those that didn't. The good to great companies operated with an almost fanatical dedication to the truth. They did not filter data to make it look pretty. They did not hide bad news from the CEO. They looked at the market, the competition, and their own failures with absolute clarity. The comparison companies, on the other hand, often operated in a culture of denial. Let's look at the example of the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, known as A&P. For the first half of the 20th century, A&P was the dominant grocery chain in America. But as the world changed and consumer tastes shifted from simple utility stores to larger, modern supermarkets, A&P refused to adapt. They held on to their old model because it was familiar. They ignored the data. Meanwhile, Kroger, an old, mediocre grocery chain, looked at the exact same data. They realized the world was changing. They tested new superstores. When the data showed the superstores were working, they made the brutal decision to close their old stores, replace their management, and pivot entirely. They confronted the brutal fact that their old way of life was dying. Kroger became a giant. A&P faded into irrelevance. Collins notes that you cannot make good decisions without good information, and you cannot get good information if your people are afraid to speak the truth. So how do you create a culture where the truth is heard? This chapter offers 4 specific practices. 1. Lead with questions, not answers.
Leaders of mediocre companies often start meetings by saying, "Here is what we are going to do." They use the meeting to manipulate the team into agreeing with them. Level 5 leaders start by saying, "I don't know. What do you think?" They use meetings to explore, to prod, and to uncover reality. They ask why 5 times. They are not trying to be the smartest person in the room. They are trying to turn over every rock. 2. Engage in dialogue and debate, not coercion. In the good to great companies, meetings were often loud, heated, and intense. People argued. They disagreed. This wasn't fighting for the sake of fighting. It was the friction of intelligence searching for the best answer. In the comparison companies, there was often a polite silence where everyone nodded along with the CEO, terrified to rock the boat. 3. Conduct autopsies without blame. When a decision goes wrong, the natural instinct is to ask, who is responsible for this mess? This leads to cover-ups. The great companies asked, what happened in the process that led to this error? By removing the blame, they removed the fear, allowing the truth of the mistake to be analyzed so it wouldn't happen again. 4. Build red flag mechanisms. Great companies created systems that allowed critical information to bypass the hierarchy and go straight to the top. They empowered their people to raise a flag when they saw something dangerous, ensuring that bad news traveled as fast as good news. However, simply confronting the brutal facts is not enough. If you only look at how bad things are, you might fall into despair. This brings us to the emotional core of the book, a concept named after Admiral Jim Stockdale, the Stockdale Paradox. Admiral Stockdale was the highest-ranking U.S. military officer in the Hanoi Hilton prisoner of war camp during the Vietnam War. He was tortured over 20 times. He had no release date. He had no reason to believe he would survive. When Collins interviewed Stockdale, he asked, "Who didn't make it out?" Stockdale replied, "Oh, that's easy. The optimists." Collins was confused. The optimists? Stockdale explained, "The optimists were the ones who said, 'We're going to be out by Christmas.' And Christmas would come, and Christmas would go. Then they'd say, 'We're going to be out by Easter.' And Easter would come, and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving. And then it would be Christmas again. And they died of a broken heart." Stockdale then grabbed Collins by the shoulders and said, "This is a very important lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. This is the key. You must hold 2 opposing thoughts in your mind simultaneously. Life is terrible right now. The market is crashing. Our product is failing. The brutal facts. We will win. We will figure this out. We will emerge from this stronger. The unwavering faith. The good to great companies all embodied this paradox. They didn't pretend the challenges weren't there, but they also never doubted their ultimate success. If you are a leader, your job is to maintain this duality. You must look your team in the eye and say, this is going to be incredibly difficult, and we might not see profits for 2 years, but I promise you, if we stick to our disciplines, we will win. This chapter teaches us that charisma can actually be a liability. A charismatic leader often blinds people to reality. Everyone wants to please the great visionary, so they hide the ugly truth. If you have a strong personality, you must work extra hard to create a climate where the truth is valued more than your opinion. Once you have the facts on the table, what do you do with them? How do you turn these facts into a strategy? You need a concept that cuts through the noise. You need to think like a hedgehog.
Chapter 5. The Hedgehog Concept. Simplicity within the 3 circles. We have confronted the brutal facts. We have faced the hard truths of our reality. Now we must synthesize those facts into a clear, guiding strategy. To explain how the great companies did this, Jim Collins turns to a famous essay by Isaiah Berlin, titled The Hedgehog and the Fox. The essay divides the world into 2 types of thinkers. The fox knows many things. Foxes are cunning. They see the world in all its complexity. They pursue many ends at the same time. They are scattered, moving on many levels. The hedgehog knows one big thing. Hedgehogs simplify a complex world into a single organizing idea, a basic principle or concept that unifies and guides everything. It doesn't matter how complex the world gets. The hedgehog reduces all challenges to simple hedgehog ideas. In the parable, the fox is always trying to catch the hedgehog. The fox devises complex strategies, sneaks around corners, and uses its speed. But every time the fox attacks, the hedgehog simply rolls up into a ball of sharp spikes. The fox retreats, nose bleeding. The hedgehog wins, not because it is smarter or faster, but because its strategy is simple, effective, and perfectly suited to its strengths. The study found that the leaders of the good to great companies were hedgehogs. They were not dazzled by complexity. They took the chaos of the market and distilled it into a single crystalline concept that guided every decision. But a hedgehog concept is not just a slogan or a mission statement. It is not just, we want to be the best. It is a deep understanding that comes from the intersection of 3 specific circles. Imagine a Venn diagram with 3 intersecting circles. The hedgehog concept lives right in the center, where all 3 overlap. Circle 1. What you can be the best in the world at. This is a high bar. It is not what you want to be the best at. It is what you can be the best at.
This requires a brutal realization. You might be doing something right now, something you have been doing for 20 years, but if you cannot be the best in the world at it, it cannot be your hedgehog concept. For example, Abbott Laboratories realized they could not be the best pharmaceutical company in the world. They were good, but they were up against giants like Merck. However, they realized they could be the best in the world at creating products that improve cost-effective healthcare, like hospital nutrition and diagnostics, so they shifted their entire focus there. This circle is about understanding your genetic coding. It's about realizing we have a potential for greatness in this specific niche, and if we focus here, nobody can beat us. Circle 2. What drives your economic engine? This is the second circle. You need to understand the mechanics of your profitability better than anyone else. The great companies often discovered a single economic denominator, a ratio of profit per X, that had the biggest impact on their system. For Walgreens, standard industry metrics focused on profit per store, but Walgreens realized that profit per store encouraged them to open stores in cheap, bad locations just to increase the count. They realized their true engine was profit per customer visit. If they focused on that, they would open stores on expensive corners, convenience, add drive-thrus, convenience, and offer 1-hour photo processing, convenience. By increasing the value of each visit, the system exploded. This denominator changes how you view your business. Are you maximizing profit per employee, profit per geographic region, profit per brand? You must find the single metric that aligns with your reality. Circle 3. What you are deeply passionate about. This is not about manufacturing passion. You cannot walk into a room and say, "Okay, team, let's get passionate about light bulbs." The good to great companies focused on doing things that they were already zealous about. Philip Morris executives were genuinely passionate about tobacco. They loved the product. They loved the culture. It sounds controversial, but strictly from a business perspective, their passion fueled their resilience. If you are doing something solely for the money, circle 2, and you can be the best at it, circle 1, but you hate doing it, you will not have the endurance to become great. You will quit when it gets hard. The Hedgehog Concept is the intersection. If you make a lot of money doing something you are good at but not passionate about, you will be successful but unhappy. If you are passionate and good but it doesn't make money, you have a hobby, not a business. If you are passionate and it makes money but you aren't the best at it, you will always be vulnerable to competitors.
You need all three. Finding your hedgehog concept is an iterative process. It is not a lightning bolt of inspiration. It is more like a fog lifting. Collins describes a mechanism called the council. This is a group of the right people, chapter 3, who engage in the brutal dialogue, chapter 4, to debate the 3 circles. They ask, are we really the best at this, or are we just lying to ourselves? They ask, is this really our economic driver? Let's test the data. On average, it took the good to great companies 4 years to clarify their hedgehog concept. It is a slow, grinding process of understanding, but once they found it, the results were explosive. Once you have your hedgehog concept, the discipline changes. It becomes about the discipline of saying no. A great company will look at a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and say, no, that does not fit our 3 circles. Mediocre companies are cursed by the fear of missing out. They chase every trend. They try to be everything to everyone. The hedgehog knows that clarity is power. So we have the leader, the people, the facts, and the concept. Now we need to build the culture that executes this concept day in and out. Narrator, Chapter 6, A Culture of Discipline. We have arrived at a pivotal moment in the framework. We have the disciplined people, first 2. We have the disciplined thought, the hedgehog concept. Now we need the 3rd component, disciplined action. When you hear the word discipline, what comes to mind? You might imagine a military drill sergeant, a strict school teacher, or a massive manual of rules and regulations. You might imagine a culture that is rigid, stifling, and bureaucratic. Jim Collins argues that this is exactly the wrong way to view discipline. In fact, bureaucracy is a sign of incompetence. Bureaucracy arises to compensate for incompetence and a lack of discipline. If you have the wrong people on the bus, you need rules to control them.
If you have the right people, you don't need a rule book, you need a framework. This chapter introduces the concept of freedom within a framework. In a culture of discipline, people do not have jobs, they have responsibilities. The leadership defines the system, the boundaries, the goals, the constraints, the framework. But within those boundaries, the individual has total freedom to decide how to achieve the best results. Think of an airline pilot. They operate within a very strict framework. They have air traffic control, specific flight paths, and safety protocols. They cannot just fly wherever they want. However, within that framework, they have total responsibility for the aircraft. If they encounter a storm, they have the autonomy to decide how to navigate it. They are not calling headquarters every 5 minutes asking for permission to bank left. The good to great companies built organizations that felt like this. They were not tyrannical, they were focused. Collins draws a sharp distinction here between a culture of discipline and a tyrant who disciplines. In the comparison companies, you often saw a level 4 leader who personally disciplined the organization through sheer force of will. I am the boss, and you will do it my way. This works for a while. It creates a temporary spike in performance. But the moment that leader leaves, the discipline leaves with them, and the company collapses. In the good to great companies, the discipline was built into the culture. It wasn't dependent on the CEO. It was self-policing. A striking example in this chapter is the story of Dave Scott, the 6-time Ironman triathlon world champion. In an interview, Scott described his training regimen. He would bike 75 miles, swim 20,000 meters, and run 17 miles a day. But the detail that stuck out was his diet.
Scott would rinse his cottage cheese before eating it to wash off the excess fat.
Now, there is no scientific evidence that rinsing cottage cheese makes you win triathlons, but the act of rinsing the cottage cheese demonstrates a level of discipline that says, I will do every single tiny thing required to be the best. The good to great companies were full of people who rinsed their cottage cheese. At Wells Fargo, they froze executive salaries, they sold the corporate jet, the CEO worked out of a tiny office. They didn't do this because they were broke. They did it because they wanted to combat the banker's culture of excess. They wanted to model the discipline of efficiency. They were running a marathon, not a sprint. The most critical application of discipline in this chapter connects back to the Hedgehog Concept. A culture of discipline is not just about working hard. It is about the fanatical adherence to the Hedgehog Concept and the refusal to do anything else. This is where the stop doing list comes in. Most of us have to-do lists. We are constantly adding new tasks, new goals, and new projects. Good to great companies institutionalized stop doing lists. They looked at everything they were doing and asked, does this fit our Hedgehog Concept? If the answer was no, they stopped doing it immediately. They displayed a remarkable ability to unplug machinery that wasn't working. If a business division wasn't number 1 or 2 in the world, they sold it or closed it. If a bureaucracy was slowing them down, they killed it. One of the great dangers mediocre companies face is the opportunity curse. When you are good, you have many opportunities. You can expand here, acquire this, or launch that. But if you chase opportunities that fall outside your 3 circles, you will dilute your greatness. The discipline to say no to a great opportunity because it doesn't fit your concept is the hallmark of a great company. Collins summarizes this chapter with a simple formula. When you have disciplined people, you don't need hierarchy.
When you have disciplined thought, you don't need bureaucracy. When you have disciplined action, you don't need excessive controls. When you combine a culture of discipline with an ethic of entrepreneurship, you get the magical alchemy of great performance. You get people who think like owners, act like diligent workers, and adhere to a consistent system of excellence. But there is one more variable we must discuss. We live in a modern age. What about technology? Isn't technology the primary driver of change? The research has a surprising answer for that. Chapter 7. Technology Accelerators. We live in an age obsessed with technology. We are constantly told that we must digitize or die. We are told that the internet, AI, and automation change everything. It would be natural to assume that the companies that went from good to great did so because they had better technology than their competitors, or because they were early adopters of the latest trends. Jim Collins and his research team expected to find exactly that. They expected technology to be a primary driver of the transformation. They were wrong. In this chapter, Collins uncovers a counterintuitive truth. Technology by itself is never a primary cause of greatness. When the researchers interviewed the executives of the good to great companies, they found something strange. The executives rarely mentioned technology. In fact, in 80% of the interviews, technology wasn't even listed as a top 5 factor in their success. Compare this to the media coverage of the time. The business world was hysterical about the rise of the internet and a dot-com boom. Companies were throwing millions of dollars at new software, terrified of being left behind. They were operating out of fear, the fear of missing out, the fear of obsolescence. The good to great companies operated differently. They did not ignore technology, but they approached it with a completely different mindset.
The central principle of this chapter is this. Technology is an accelerator of momentum, not a creator of it. Think of a race car. If the car has a broken engine, flat tires, and a driver who doesn't know the track, putting a turbocharger on it won't help. In fact, it might just make the car crash faster. However, if the car is perfectly tuned, the tires are fresh, and the driver is a world champion, then and only then does the turbocharger allow them to pull away from the pack. The turbocharger is technology. The car is your Hedgehog Concept. The good to great companies never used technology as a starting point. They never asked, what is the latest tech and how do we use it? They asked, does this specific technology fit directly into our Hedgehog Concept? If the answer was yes, they became pioneers. They applied it with fanaticism.
If the answer was no, they ignored it completely, no matter how popular it was. Let's look at the example of Walgreens again. In the early days of the internet, the dot-com frenzy was at its peak. Online pharmacies like drugstore.com launched with massive fanfare, promising to wipe out brick-and-mortar stores. Analysts screamed that Walgreens was a dinosaur. They said the physical store was dead. Walgreens didn't panic. They didn't launch a hasty, half-baked website just to look modern. They went back to their hedgehog concept: convenience. They asked, how can the internet make the customer experience more convenient? They realized they could use the internet to link their digital prescriptions to their physical network. A customer could order online and pick up at the drive-thru. Or if they were traveling, they could go to any Walgreens in the country, and the computer system would have their data instantly. Walgreens used technology to accelerate their existing advantage, not to replace it. The result? Drugstore.com eventually lost almost all its value, while Walgreens stock continued its relentless climb. Contrast this with the comparison companies. They often viewed technology as a magic pill. Whenever they fell behind, they would try to buy their way out of trouble with a new system. If we just install this new ERP software, we'll be efficient. If we just buy these robots, our quality will improve. Collins calls this the trap of the silver bullet. Mediocre companies look for external solutions to internal problems. They think technology can fix a culture problem or a competence problem. It cannot. If you automate a bad process, you just get bad results faster. This chapter also addresses the fear of being left behind. The crawler mentality says, we have to jump on this bandwagon or we will die. The good to great mentality says, we will crawl, walk, and then run, but only in the direction of our own North Star. When the Vietnam War ended, many feared the technology of the North Vietnamese wasn't the issue, it was their strategy. When Nucor Steel adopted many-mill technology, it wasn't because it was new, it was because it fit their hedgehog concept of low-cost production. Other steel companies had access to the same technology, but failed to use it effectively because they lacked the discipline and the culture. The takeaway here is profound for the modern era. We are currently facing the rise of artificial intelligence. The lesson from good to great suggests that AI will not make a mediocre company great. If you don't know who your customer is, or if your culture is toxic, AI will not save you. But if you have a clear hedgehog concept, if you know exactly what you can be the best in the world at, and you apply AI to that specific leverage point, you will create a gap between you and your competitors that they can never close. Technology is a tool, it is a lever, but you are the one who must provide the fulcrum. So we have built the machine, we have the people, the thought, the action, and the technology. Now how do we get this massive machine to move? And more importantly, how do we keep it moving? This leads us to the most powerful metaphor in the entire book. Chapter 8, The Flywheel and the Doom Loop. We have now assembled all the components of greatness. We have level 5 leadership, the right people, the brutal facts, the hedgehog concept, and a culture of discipline. But how do these pieces actually come together to create that explosive point of breakthrough? How does a company go from static to kinetic? To answer this, Jim Collins asks us to visualize a specific mechanical structure.
Imagine a massive, heavy flywheel mounted on an axle. It is huge, 30 feet in diameter, weighing 5,000 pounds. Your job is to get this wheel spinning as fast as possible. You push with all your might. It barely moves. You grunt and heave, and finally it inches forward. You keep pushing. It takes you 3 hours just to get it to complete one single rotation. It feels impossible. But you don't stop. You keep pushing. The second rotation takes a little less time. The third rotation is a bit faster. You build a rhythm. 4 turns, 5 turns, 10 turns. Suddenly, something happens. The weight of the wheel, which was originally working against you, starts working for you. The momentum kicks in. 20 turns, 50 turns, 100 turns. Now the wheel is spinning so fast that it is almost a blur. It has its own force. You are barely pushing it anymore. The flywheel is practically pulling you. Now, ask yourself the critical question. Which specific push was the one that made it go fast? Was it the first push? The 10th? The 100th? No, it was all of them added together. This is the flywheel effect. When the researchers looked at the good to great companies,
They looked for the miracle moment, the singular event, the big launch, or the killer product that catapulted them to success. They couldn't find it. When they interviewed the executives, they asked, at what point did the transformation happen? The executives were often confused. They would say, transformation? It didn't feel like a transformation. It just felt like we were doing the work one day at a time. To the outside world, the rise of a company like Nucor or Circuit City looked like a sudden dramatic breakthrough. The media loves to write headlines like overnight success or the big turnaround. But inside the company, it felt completely different. It was a quiet, deliberate process of accumulation. There was no launch party.
There was no name change. There was no new vision speech. There was just the relentless pushing of the flywheel in a consistent direction, aligned with the Hedgehog Concept. This leads us to the opposing concept, the doom loop. The comparison companies, the ones that failed, did not understand the physics of the flywheel. They were impatient. They wanted the breakthrough without the buildup. They sought the miracle moment. These companies would often launch a massive new program with huge fanfare. They would bring in a celebrity CEO, level 4, who would scream, "We are going to revolutionize this industry." They would push the flywheel in one direction. But when the results didn't happen instantly, because the flywheel is heavy, they would panic. They would say, "This isn't working." So they would stop the wheel. They would fire the CEO. They would hire a new leader who would say, "No, we need to go this way." They would start pushing the flywheel in the opposite direction. You can imagine the result. By constantly starting and stopping, by changing direction every few years, they never built any momentum. They expended massive amounts of energy but went nowhere. This cycle is the doom loop. Step 1, disappointing results. Step 2, reaction without understanding. Step 3, new direction, new leader, new program. Step 4, no buildup of momentum. Step 5, disappointing results. Repeat. Collins highlights the destructive role of acquisitions in the doom loop. Mediocre companies often try to buy growth. They think, if we merge with this giant competitor, we will instantly be great. They use acquisitions as a substitute for the flywheel. This almost always fails. Merging two mediocre companies does not make one great company, it makes one big, mediocre mess. The good to great companies used acquisitions differently. They never bought a company to create momentum. They waited until their flywheel was already spinning at max speed, and then they used acquisitions as an accelerator. They bought companies that fit perfectly into their existing momentum, allowing them to spin even faster. The key takeaway from this chapter is the power of consistency. Consistency is not sexy, it is not exciting, but it is the physics of greatness. When you align your people, your thought, and your action, and you devote yourself to pushing in one intelligent direction over a long period of time, the laws of physics take over. The cumulative effect of your efforts produces results that seem almost magical to the outside observer. But you know the truth. It wasn't magic. It was the flywheel. We are now nearing the end of our analysis. We have opened the black box. We understand the input and the output. But there is one final question to answer. If we do all of this, if we go from good to great, how do we stay there? How do we ensure that our greatness endures for generations? Chapter 9, From Good to Great to Built to Last. As we approach the end of our journey, we must address a fascinating chronological twist in Jim Collins' work. 6 years before publishing Good to Great, Collins published a book called Built to Last. That book studied companies that had sustained greatness for over 50 years, icons like Walt Disney, Marriott, and Merck. When Good to Great was released, many readers asked, how do these two books fit together? In this chapter, Collins reveals that Good to Great is actually the prequel to Built to Last. Think of it this way. Good to Great is about how you turn a mediocre company into a high-performance engine. Built to Last is about how you keep that engine running for a century. To build an enduring institution, you first need the transition, good to great, and then you need the habits of longevity, built to last. The central concept bridging these two worlds is the preservation of core ideology while stimulating progress. Enduring greatness requires a dynamic duality. On one side, you have your core ideology. This consists of your core values and your core purpose.
These are things that never change. They are sacred. For example, Disney's core value is imagination and wholesomeness. This was true in 1920, and it is true today. It is the anchor. On the other side, you have stimulating progress. This is everything else: your strategies, your practices, your goals, and your technologies. These things must change constantly to adapt to a changing world. The mistake most companies make is mixing these two up. They think their current strategy is sacred, so they refuse to change it even when it fails. This is refusing to stimulate progress. Or they panic and change their core values to fit the current trend. This is failing to preserve the core. Great companies protect the core with religious zeal, but they are willing to kill and replace any business practice that no longer serves that core. Collins also revisits the concept of the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal. A BHAG is a goal so big that you don't know if you can achieve it. It is a mechanism to stimulate progress. When Boeing decided to build the 747, it was a BHAG. It required them to bet the entire company. It forced them to grow. It gave the flywheel a massive push. But here is the critical distinction found in this chapter: bad BHAGs versus good BHAGs. A bad BHAG is set with bravado, but without understanding. It is a goal like, "We will be bigger than Apple," set by a company that hasn't even mastered its own local market. This is hubris. It leads to the doom loop. A good BHAG is set with understanding. It is born out of the 3 circles of the Hedgehog Concept. It is bold, yes, but it makes sense because it aligns with what you can be the best in the world at. Ultimately, this chapter teaches us that greatness is not just about economic returns.
It is about building an institution that makes a unique contribution to the world, an institution that, if it were to disappear, would leave a gaping hole that could not easily be filled by anyone else. Conclusion. We have covered a tremendous amount of ground. We have dismantled the myths of the celebrity CEO, the silver bullet of technology, and the idea that greatness is a matter of luck. As we close this audiobook insight, let us review the framework one last time. It begins with Level 5 leadership. You need leaders who are humble yet driven, who channel their ambition into the company, not themselves. It moves to first who, then what. You must get the right people on the bus before you drive. It requires confronting the brutal facts. You must have the discipline to see reality as it is, while maintaining the faith that you will prevail, the Stockdale paradox. It centers on the hedgehog concept. You must find the intersection of what you are best at, what drives your economics, and what you are passionate about. It is sustained by a culture of discipline. You need people who adhere to the system fanatically, allowing for freedom within a framework. It is accelerated by technology. You use tech as a tool to speed up your momentum, not to create it. And finally, it is built by the flywheel. You commit to the relentless, consistent pushing in one direction until you achieve breakthrough. Jim Collins ends his study with a profound thought on the meaning of work. Why bother? Why try to be great? Isn't good enough? The answer is not about money. The answer is that it is simply harder to be mediocre than it is to be great. Mediocrity drains your energy. It feels pointless. It leaves you feeling tired and unfulfilled. Greatness, on the other hand, is energizing, striving for excellence, working with people you love, and building something that matters. That is what makes life worth living. The journey from good to great is not just a business strategy. It is a life strategy. It is a call to reject the easy path of good enough and to commit yourself to the rigorous, rewarding, and meaningful climb toward greatness. Thank you for listening to the Audiobook Insights. We hope this summary helps you push your own flywheel, one turn at a time.